And thank you to the city of Rome, Luca, Carla, thank you very much, UCLG, Jordi, for this initiative, in fact, of making public and relevant the importance of culture in the life of the cities. I will not approach my contribution from the European perspective, because I think we can reflect in a more general and global way on issues that, from my perspective, are crucial when we talk about inequality. And they were mentioned before, both by Edgar and by Joanna, but I think we need to address them really and truly if we do not want to incur in a sort of rather symbolic effort when talking about equal participation in cultural life. So from my personal point of view, the success, if we can talk about success, but if the success of an open and honest dialogue on inequalities has a lot to do with three interdependent issues. First, it was mentioned by Joanna, the very idea of the different as opposed to normality, of what is accepted as normal culture, as normal, and what is behind the idea of the otherness. Second issue I want to address is the issue of legitimacy, of who is a partaker of the cultural life, and where lies the right to equality and the recognition of a peer or equal condition. And third, and related to this, the way how we build participation, and what is the real capacity, the agency of the participants to shape practices, contents, infrastructures, and policies related to culture. I will try to draft these three ideas in the minutes I have. So let's go back to the first issue, the idea of the different as opposed to normality. To belong to normality could be being part as a standard, of a standard that is built upon an hypothetical common ground. But what is the normal? How do we construct normality? And how do we construct exceptionality, difference? How do we build the mere idea of the other, the strange? And I want to focus on the terminology we use to refer to normality and to minder the otherness. This terminology is a bit tricky. We use words like tolerance, inclusion, integration, but these words are taming the conflict and hiding an asymmetrical power as they are applied on the basis of simply unequal positions, tolerant and tolerated, included and excluded, those who are synchronized with the given standards, the normality, and those who are not. So deep down, this inside-out approach hides an uneven relationship. If I tolerate you, if I integrate you, it's because I have that power to do so, and you don't. So to approach equality in terms of the other that needs to be included in a sort of commonplace is an approach that systematically reproduces exclusions, canons, hegemonies, and dominance that are rooted in our normality. And therefore, it is necessary, from my point of view, to do an in-depth work to analyze the structure and the strength of this canon. We need to be able to deconstruct the mechanism upon which we have built the idea of the difference, and really tear apart, without fear, the embedded structures of hegemony and normality. We need to transform these structures as they are acting in the way we understand cultural access, in how cultural institutions function, and the way we strategize cultural policies. What we need to do, I think, is an exercise of dispossessing the idea of the normal and start imagining another way to address plurality. And related to this, and as a consequence, and going to the second point on legitimacy, we need a deep review also about who and who is not considered as a legitimate participant in the production of culture. And again, we're facing several paradoxes. On one hand, we have, when we talk about cultural policies and cultural rights in cities, we are thinking of the citizens. The question here is what defines the conditions of being a legitimate citizen. I went to the Oxford Dictionary just to be clear. So, okay, what is a citizens? And I found this double meaning of citizens. On the one hand, and I'm quoting, it is a legally recognized subject or national of a state, either native or naturalized. That legal status includes rights and a set of obligations or duties that the citizens owe to that institution and their fellow citizens in return. But there's a second definition. And this definition describes a citizen as an inhabitant of a particular town or city. And this definition do not mention his or her legal rights or duties. So which definitions are we choosing when defining cultural rights, or cultural as fundamental rights? For whom? Because we do have in the cities inhabitants without citizenship, and we have groups whose cultural or racial background is still underrepresented in the cultural normality. And both of them, citizens without citizenship and those underrepresented, have very, very little rights to question the cultural hegemony. We are confronting an unequal, again an unequal consideration of who is worth to be considered and constituted as a citizen and who is not. And the matter of defining citizenship, marginal communities, and its rights is hiding, again, a profound inequality. And I know that behind this, there is a complex world with no simple solutions. But I think it's really urgent that we ask ourselves, how do we operate towards these misheard voices of those that are occupying spaces in another dimension of that of normality or legitimacy or legal status? So how could we really count on them when drafting cultural equal rights? Facing the issue of equality means here to critically look at who is legitimated as a citizen's worth or able to take part of the cultural collective construction. And no matter if this also means to displace legitimacy towards the fringes of the citizen condition. And last but not least, legitimacy not only affects that primary level of who is worth enough to be considered as a citizen with rights, but it also opens up the question on what are the real capacities that citizens have to participate and influence the cultural dialogue, the cultural production, and its infrastructures and policies. And in this case, I'm not just referring to the rights of those left aside, but to the recognitions of those who, in fact, can participate, are able to participate in culture, because they are legally able to do it. And here I would like to briefly reflect on this participation. Under my point of view, cultural participation does not only mean being able to access or produce culture, but also being able to influence cultural canons. Participation affects the entire cultural matrix: education, private life, creation, distribution of cultural goods, access, enjoyment of culture. But participation is also, I think, about shaping these public policies, cultural projects, cultural organizations, and cultural institutions. And the question here is, what is the real capacity that given for political actions of citizens? Beyond the exercise of voting, how can they really affect the construction of the commons? And I'm afraid, just afraid, that sometimes we tend to understand plural participation as a mere exercise of tokenism, a sort of inclusion without influence, a symbolic sign. So tokenism is the practice of making only a symbolic effort to be inclusive to members of minority groups, especially by inviting people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of racial, cultural, or sexual equality within a group or in a process. And the effort is including this token individual is usually intended to create the impression of social inclusiveness and diversity in order to deflect accusations of discrimination. But to which extent is the individual and collective agency, the influence, real performing? How open is the dialogue about cultural strategies, policies, and institutions to the citizens' influence? To go beyond tokenism is to be ready also to be disoriented through the action of other subjectivities, other sensitivities, other backgrounds that might influence both process of dialogues and the previous goal we had in mind, diverting them. And to conclude, when reflecting on equal participation, we may need to go two steps backwards and analyze our participation processes from an intersectional perspective. From this perspective, we need to critically think on the privileges, powers, history, the material conditions and the immaterial conditions of our structures and of the participants we call in. Because the latency of this bias is as crucial as it is ignored, and this is happening everywhere. Equality could mean, again, dispossessing, displacing, and disorienting our cultural standards and being able to rethinking and reshaping the tools and infrastructures that we have equipped ourselves with. And I really hope that the Charter of Rome, it's a starting point to do so.